Hi, my name is Alex Williams, founder of the New Stack, and you are listening to the New Stack Analyst podcast, the show about at-scale application development, deployment, and management. Thanks for joining us. Hey, we'd like to thank Cloud Foundry for sponsoring our Pancake Breakfast at the Cloud Foundry Summit in Santa Clara, California. Pancakes were awesome. Discussions were great on Kubo, Open Service Broker API, the state of Cloud Foundry. Thank you again, Cloud Foundry. You can learn more about them at cloudfoundry.org. All right, well, welcome everyone to the Pancake Breakfast. Thank you so much for joining us here at the Cloud Foundry Summit. We do these Pancake Breakfasts at different events around the world. This is our second one at the Cloud Foundry Summit. I think we actually debuted the Pancake robot last year. We did. And the whole idea here is to have a conversation, enjoy some pancakes, have a short stack with the new stack, as we like to say. I'd like to first thank Cloud Foundry for having us here today, for sponsoring this breakfast. Thank you so much to the Cloud Foundry group. Let's give them a big hand. This is such an exciting time in this space, and we go to lots of conferences, and I come back to the Cloud Foundry conference, and I'm just always astounded about the new projects that I'm seeing, the new developments in the technology, and increasingly how these technology and ecosystems are intersecting. And that to me is really, really encouraging, because you can start to think of these different communities as almost different islands, and they're actually very connected in many, many ways. And it starts, really with the people who are making it, who are developing the technology itself. And so there's been some really, I find, encouraging developments, in the Cloud Foundry ecosystem and in related ecosystems too, such as Kubernetes. And so I'd really like to look at, have a discussion about those different ecosystems, how they're intersecting, and getting a view on where are we with Cloud Foundry and where is it going with that perspective in mind about these other communities that are out there. So I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have Abby Kearns of the Cloud Foundry, Executive Director of the Cloud Foundry Foundation. Hey, Abby.
Hi, Alex.
We have Dieu Cao. How are you, Dieu? Dieu's with Pivotal, and Dieu, what's your role there?
So at Pivotal, I'm Director of Product Management, overseeing Elastic Runtime. So helping to kind of overseeing shipping our commercial product there. And then with the foundation, I am a runtime PMC lead, overseeing all of the core runtime projects.
And Holger Mueller of Constellation Research. Holger, tell us really about what your focus is, what your research specialty is.
My research is about enterprise accelerations. How can companies get faster? Everything has to move faster, and there's two aspects of it. You see me as a schizophrenic person. One is software, talk about today of next generation applications. The other one is future of work. It's the people with the right technology to be a faster enterprise. But I have to do one intersection. I've been 30 years in the software industry, and as a father of 4 girls, woman, it's the very first time I ever am on a panel where I'm the only male, so it's a good sign, good development, so very happy about this.
And Sarah Novotny. Sarah, tell us a little bit about your role at Google and what else you're working on, in particular Kubernetes.
Sure. So I am leading the Open Platforms group working on open source communities for Google Cloud Platform. Kubernetes is my first and favorite, I can't say the name more with more children, but my first and favorite open source community at Google. So I lead the community engagement for Kubernetes across the now hundreds of companies that are contributing to it.
Excellent. Before we get started with some questions, I just want to say we like to make these Pancake Breakfast as interactive as possible. And I know not everyone's always encouraged, feels good about raising their hands, but we're going to try. And if you raise your hand and ask a question, you get a pancake. a printed 3D robot, Pancake robot Pancake. So, so why don't we just get started? I'm actually going to start with a question for the crowd. How many people here would consider themselves developers? How many people would consider themselves operations people? How many people consider them both? Okay, great, great. Okay, so that gives us kind of a, a sense of who's out here. So why don't we just begin? And Abby, what is the theme that you're really trying to tell here at Cloud Foundry? What is it that you want the people who are building, their own, infrastructure out, who are building out their own, development environments out, their own platforms? What do you want them to get out of this conference? What are the themes that you think are important to think about as we go into the rest of the year?
Well, it's really two things. One that, and I talked about this a little bit in my keynote yesterday, is developers are the heroes of this period that we're in. When we think about digital transformation, and Holger touched on it on the people piece, but it's the developers that are creating the applications that are fundamentally changing where we're going with technology. And as we think about all of the work that's going into this shift and where that's going, it's the developers that are leading that. And then another, and this is actually not a coincidence, the tagline of this event, which is the freedom to create. So giving developers the capability to take their ideas, create that, and get it out into the hands of users as quickly as possible.
So
can I build on that?
Yeah.
Make it controversial?
Please.
It's not about the developer.
What's it about?
Who of you is an executive who has to make the decision at the company? I'm not going to go down the standard best practice of buying standard software from the SAPs, the Oracles, the Infos, but I'm going to build something myself on Cloud Foundry. And my career is on the line that it will be successful. That's the people who are unfortunately not enough in demand. And nothing against developers. I love developers. I've been developers.
Well,
they're very important, right? But if nobody makes a decision to say I'm building something custom these days, then there's not going to be that project. And as a developer, I learn a new tool, a new technology, my market value goes up. I don't want to be associated with failure, of course. It's not good for anybody. But as a developer, the question is, did you learn something? And use the technology for the next time when it will succeed. As an executive, you failed with a multi-million project. It's been a little harder to make that decision again.
But isn't that
isn't
that part of the problem? Because you'll hear lots of developers say failure is actually a good thing. That it's okay to fail. You got to fail. You always want to fail.
Can't be too many, right?
Well, there's clearly a fine line.
Yeah.
But I do think you have a point, and I think what Holger is saying is that developers are pivotal and crucial in this momentum and the development of applications, but unless the executive leadership is on board with that shift, it isn't going to happen, which is true.
Developers are always crucial, right? There's no question about it. But the decision of the enterprise of risking a next generation project, which is custom, makes the developer life so different, right? You build something new, exciting, on a new platform with new tools, with new technologies, versus, oh, we need a field in the third screen on the left. Can you make sure it's there? Right? Which used to be much of the developer work 10 years ago, and even still today is. Yeah.
So let's talk about some of the new developments that we are starting to see in the Cloud Foundry community, in particular around the Open Service Broker API. Yui, can you tell us, just help explain what the Open Service Broker API is for folks out here who may not be familiar with it?
Sure. So the Open Service Broker API came from Cloud Foundry's Service Broker spec, which was a very simple contract that Cloud Foundry had with services that we implemented a few different endpoints if you wanted to offer a service on Cloud Foundry. Provision, and what does provision mean? It means you could create a database. It could be create an account over on New Relic. It could be anything. But it was a very specific kind of command. And so you have the spec that any service can decide what does that mean to them. We kind of broker this interaction between your app and all of these different services. And it was a nice, clean abstraction. I think we had a lot of different services available in the Cloud Foundry ecosystem. And then there was interest from other communities, and we, with Abby's help, we decided to form this working group to see how could we extend this spec so that other groups, other communities like Kubernetes could participate and benefit from this abstraction and coordination that we developed thoughtfully. And I think it's really great that now you could provision something for Cloud Foundry and connect it to your app. You could provision something like a database for your app on Kubernetes, and it just works.
Great. Who out here is using the Open Service Broker API right now? Over here? All right. Can we ask you guys how you're using it? Gentleman in the blue T-shirt or in the striped blue T-shirt?
Well, I am developing a file system service, so a service broker that brokers file systems. That's part of the spec, but a very new part.
So what is your business reason for doing it? What is the kind of the driver for it? Or is this just something of interest? And why is it of interest?
No, there are business reasons. There are legacy applications that need file system access, can't be rewritten to only talk to databases or object stores or whatever. And the file system service, the volume service API is the answer to that need, and it allows basically any legacy application to turn into a 12 factors app.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah. So Sarah, I'm curious from your perspective about the Open Service Broker API. How does this fit into, the vision for, for the communities out there that are not necessarily Cloud Foundry, such as Kubernetes?
Oh, as Yui said, there was interest from the Kubernetes community and just broadly in the industry to find a way to standardize on what was a really nice specification around service brokers inside Cloud Foundry. And so Google, in part, and the Kubernetes community helped work and make this Open Service Broker API itself independent from Cloud Foundry. And then we have kicked off an incubator project inside Kubernetes called the Service Catalog, which was one of our very early incubated projects. And it's a lot of work between Red Hat and IBM and a bit of work from Google that are implementing the specification for the Open Service Broker API and making services discoverable, manageable, maintainable through this ecosystem sub-project of Kubernetes. And so that's actually stretched the Kubernetes project broadly in the sense that it has made us make sure we have ways at the edges of the Kubernetes, the main core Kubernetes project, to have this ecosystem work happen. So it's been really amazing to have both the broad community excitement about it and then have that excitement push us to tidy up our own house and make sure that we have these clean abstractions for the service catalog to be able to work through.
So is that the symbiosis then? That's it.
Composable infrastructure.
How do you guys all keep in touch? I mean, there's so many different open source communities, and I'm sure there's others that are starting to...
Telepathy.
Yeah, and so telepathy. Because, I mean, the people out...
We meet at conferences.
Now it all makes sense.
Yes, the telepathy and meeting at conferences.
That's why...
Twitter also works. Yeah, it's all on Twitter. So I can kind of go through how does Kubernetes do this, which may or may not be the best example. We have dozens of mailing lists that are narrowed by focus. We have one of the most astonishingly active Slack groups I've ever run across. We have something like 15,000 people signed up in our Slack community. We have about 90 channels in there.
Jeez.
Yeah. Before the Cloud Native Compute Foundation delightfully got us a professional or an account with Slack. But before that, there was with the free account when we were just kind of slumming along with that. There was a 10,000 message limit on it, and we were going through it in something like 18 hours by the time we finally got. It was insane.
What kind of robots do you?
It was real time. It was pretty much only real time. Yeah.
What kind of robots are you needing to develop to keep track of this?
So funny you ask that. We've developed a bunch of tooling around GitHub in order to manage the notifications out of GitHub. So yes, this is just a crazy, mad, fun, intersectional community that touches across the whole industry. And making sure that we have space for these nascent projects that work and bring together open source communities that aren't necessarily all started from Kubernetes is huge and important.
So it's like madness, but yet happy madness and working madness.
I think the Open Service Broker Group, they actually do meet regularly to talk about the different issues that have been opened against it, kind of try to move those forward and see, okay, which one of these do we all agree on that we add to the spec? And the spec, it's just a document. The output of this group is the spec. There's no actual code per se out of the working group. So it's kind of interesting. But they meet regularly. I believe other extension points that are coming up, like the container storage interface, they're also starting to meet more regularly, and that's pretty exciting that these independent ecosystems are working together to establish like these standard interfaces.
So what's the user participation like then? Like the people, who are actually, implementing these technologies, how do you see that coming along?
So the service catalog inside Kubernetes is an implementation of the Open Service Broker API. And that group is led by, I think it's 4 people from 4 different companies who meet regularly, to your point. They meet weekly, and then when they're trying to make large progress against a hard problem, sometimes they will have ad hoc meetings outside of that, as well as having the Slack channels and the email lists and the GitHub notifications and all of that.
How about inside Cloud Foundry, then there's a similar setup then, right? So and Cloud Foundry's taking it a step further too. I mean, you guys have certifications, that for developers, for example, right, to help people get up to speed on Cloud Foundry. Does that help kind of bolster kind of the involvement in the community? It has to.
Well, I think the training and the certification is really targeting the developers and getting them more successful with using the platform and really understanding cloud native best practices. But when I think about the value of the Open Service Broker API, which, for me, and I've said this, many times, but I actually really mean this, is that it was one of the finest examples of open source collaboration that I've seen, because they took what, Service Broker has always been one of my favorite aspects of technology, of Cloud Foundry, but to see so many people lean in and say, how do we make this the best possible technology possible was just amazing. The original team that we had around this early last year, obviously with Google leading the charge and Pivotal, but also with Red Hat and Fujitsu and IBM and SAP, it was really, really exciting to see so many people like, this is an amazing piece of technology. How do we make this even better? And build on that. And I think there's, when we first started this work a year ago, and Craig and I first started talking about this, our vision was this was just a gateway. And this was step 1 to do a lot more, to really accelerate an ecosystem around that is platform agnostic. And I think there's a lot of power and momentum in that.
So a show of hands of who's following the mailing list on Kubernetes and Cloud Foundry. How about just on Cloud Foundry? Okay. Can we ask someone so raise your hand if you're willing to answer my question? The question. Okay, here's the question is, I'm curious on how you're keeping up, up to date on kind of developments with Cloud Foundry, and how you're deciding what to try and what to use. So for example, the Open Service Broker API. What is it that's that you're interested in about it, but maybe you haven't yet given it a go?
And I'll ask a follow-on to that, which is, and how would you like to be learning about these things?
Yeah.
What would make it better?
Who can raise their hand for me, please?
Nobody will tell us how to
Oh,
do
okay, great, great.
Also, if you want to share your Gmail.
Oh, Roger, can you stand up, please, and just
Live, but now it's live. I'm Roger with El Toros, and Cloud Foundry has a monthly meeting that's open to all, and it's moderated by Dr. Max, and she's part of it every month. And there's an excellent report written up by a promising young reporter from El Toros every month that the community reads, and he rarely makes a mistake, and when he does, gets corrected. But seriously, you get deep and comprehensive reports every month and the opportunity to follow up because there's so many moving parts. Dr. Max does a good job in holding it all together. But when you want to dig down those moving parts, everyone that's involved is very, very open. And I think that's the best way to stay on track with what's going on in Cloud Foundry anyway.
But I like Sarah's follow-on, which is, what other ways could we? I think it's a great question for all of us. Is what other opportunities do we have to get you more engaged in the conversation? Because I think the Open Service Broker API is an important first step, but it really requires the community and you, the users, to really also participate in that to drive that forward. So.
Well, anyone interested in answering Sarah's question? Raise your hand. I know there were some other hands in there.
I know a lot of you here. I will call on names.
Can I do an icebreaker?
Yeah.
So it's like turning snorkelers into scuba divers. Yeah, so the developer is the person who wants to see the sea life, and it's happening underwater. That's the developing is happening. And if you're not well supported, you have to come up because you run out of air when you snorkel all the time, right? You can't follow things as you want to. The solution which people like here have to solve is that you get the certification, which you guys have done, right? So that who sends you out on the diving trip to build something, to see amazing things, knows you can do it, you'll survive, you'll come back. And the other thing is from the know-how perspective that you need to have those gas bottles or nitrogen bottles, if you're a scuba diver, that you can stay down longer and code longer, but at the same time get the updates and know what's happening in the community. That's a very hard thing to solve, which nobody has found the silver bullet yet. But there's more tools of doing this. I personally think Slack is not the solution necessarily, because it's only when you're up in the air, right? When you're looking where what's going on. Yeah, so not an endorsement of Slack. There's advantages when you have to get oriented quickly. But when you're down looking at the sea life, building your code, there must be a different way for you to know, hey, for instance, by putting your code fragments or your spec up and saying, this might be relevant for you. Or you looked at the service brokers which were available 2 months ago. There's 6 new ones, right? At some point you want to have the email for that or some way for you to come up to speed on that.
That's a good point.
So this
It's all about diving.
Right. So this comes to another question I have. One of the new projects that we're seeing is called Kubo, and perhaps and when I was first hearing about the Open Service Broker API, I'm thinking, oh well, that makes a lot of sense, right? Being able to discover services right across different open source projects, for example, right? Now with Kubo, it's a little bit. It's a different. There's a different goal here. Can you guys help explain what is Kubo and what are the goals for it and why it is kind of important now as we start thinking about these, how there are these intersections of open source communities through Cloud Foundry and Kubernetes?
I can go with the broad Kubernetes perspective, which was we want Kubernetes to be running on and with tools you're familiar with, and being able to interact with and meet you as users where you are. So if you're already comfortable with Bosch and are a Cloud Foundry user shop, then we want you to be able to explore Kubernetes and see how it fits and might be helpful for you. We don't want you to have to say, I will stop Cloud Foundry and start Kubernetes. We want it to integrate well. So that was a lot of the work that Google did to try to bring forward Kubo so that you can deploy and manage Kubernetes using Bosch.
I think from my perspective, it's kind of an and story.
So what exactly is Kubo?
Kubo is Kubernetes running on top of Bosch. So the Kubo project deploys Kubernetes using BOSH technology, so that BOSH, you get the benefits of BOSH, what BOSH does with health management. You shoot a VM, and it'll come back. It'll health manage that for you. It makes a very declarative state of. You can define very specifically, this is the Kubernetes cluster you want, and BOSH will continuously try to bring that back.
It's a great way, though, for many users that are running Kubernetes and Cloud Foundry to give them the ability to do day 2 operations with them both side by side, because many of them were doing a lot of context switching, particularly on the operations side, between the two things, but they really wanted the ability to run both, because there are amazing use cases for both to be ran side by side.
So one of the use cases I heard is that there's, the BOSH has resiliency, correct? And so to use Kubernetes on BOSH would bring more resilience than to Kubernetes itself.
So there's an interesting perspective there. So Kubernetes manages containers,
right,
and orchestrates containers. BOSH manages and orchestrates VMs.
Right.
So if you're on hardware using BOSH to manage and orchestrate the VMs, the declarative state that Yui described, I need a Kubernetes cluster that looks like this many VMs doing this many things. That does all of the VM orchestration and management. And then Kubernetes on top handles all of the services and containers that are running inside Kubernetes.
right,
So it's turtles all the way down.
right. Now, what about the issue with the master node? In Kubernetes, there's one master, right?
There is a master node, yes.
Right. And with Kubo, you're going to need to create a second master. Is that true? This was being explained to me yesterday, that there may be, that you're having to think about how these architectures line up, and that master node issue is one that needs to be tackled. Is that true, Yuri?
It's not something I'm specifically familiar with. Alejandro Goyen is working with Google on that.
Are any of the, yeah, here we go. Great. Yes, thank you. We have an expert in the crowd.
That's even more awesome.
Yeah, I work on Kubo from Pivotal side, so you don't have to create another master. You can do it. It just gives you this ability to have multi-master, but you can still deploy one master.
You can, but why would you deploy multi-master?
Because when you deploy, master has downtime, or when VM crashed, master can crash, so you probably want some HA, like tiny HA.
So
Matrix organizations are not bad for people, but are bad for software, right? So,
but
it's good to have a backup
I'm curious
master.
about this, because isn't Kubernetes known for high availability?
It is. So the master is not necessary for all of the services to keep running. You can lose a master, and the master can come back. So this goes to Kubernetes is generally run on cloud platforms, and you would have the VMs come back and the services be reinstantiated through Kubernetes. So even if you lose a master for a number of minutes, it doesn't affect the running services. So it's a meta management thing. So it is still highly available. It just will lose your ability to make changes to the system during that interval while it's not started.
So why would you need, I'm still unclear, so why would you need the multiple master node again?
Comfort? On the spot. Thank you.
So if you want to create application and want to create during redeploy of master, or don't want to be dependent that master is down and you want to recreate service, or when we was condition when you have multi availability zones, one availability zone dead, master was in that zone, worker was in that zone, and Kubernetes restores state on single node, but it doesn't move your application to other nodes. So if node is down and master is down, your application might be down.
Yeah.
So what are some of the other use cases and reasons? I heard backward compatibility as an example.
Is the reason for BOSH or for?
Well, about the integration with through Kubo, Is that not a matter of interest?
I think one of the things that the Kubo team will be addressing is upgradability, certainly.
Yes, okay.
So in the way that Bosch has one declarative state and another declarative state, how do you get there smoothly?
So what's the value then of of Bosch then to Cloud Foundry users out there? What would the value be? That basically you can run it with Bosch, basically. Then you can run Kubernetes with Bosch. Then
Yes, you
Okay.
can run Kubernetes with Bosch.
right. And so we have probably lots of Bosch users out here, right? You raise your hand if you're using Bosch. Great. Anyone using Kubernetes? Well, let me ask this question. Is there anyone out here who would be interested in using Kubernetes if it had Bosch with it? Can you back in the rack space table back there, you could tell us why?
Well, I think that mainly just for consistency, we're already using Bosch for Concourse and for Cloud Foundry. So, if we were to look into Kubernetes, we could. It would make sense for us to try using it for that as well.
Okay. So you said the consistency. Is that what you said?
And
Go.
Sorry, that would be a Kubernetes deployment on Metal for you? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Do I dumb it down too much to say that Bosch is older than Kubernetes? Kubernetes is amazingly successful, and people want to run both together to reuse code. Is there something wrong with that?
Can you say it again?
So Bosch has been longer around
Right.
than Kubernetes. Kubernetes has been amazingly successful, and now you want to bring the two together to reuse Kubernetes loads on a Bosch infrastructure?
I think they're solving two different problems.
Of course, yeah, of course.
Different layers,
Yep.
yeah.
Different problems, different layers, of course. It's a container platform running on an infrastructure platform. It's all about reuse, right? Reuse is the word why I guess I haven't spoken to the Kubo founders, fathers, mothers, like you said, favorite kids and so on, why they built Kubo, but to me it's all about reuse. Yeah. And what's in the name? Why Kubo?
Because portmanteaus are cool.
Kubernetes on Bosch.
Oh, okay.
More coffee.
So what's
Did
the
everybody know that? Am I the only person?
what's the intersection of the
Yeah,
open
just
source-
checking. So,
So
more coffee.
so now we have, so this is a good example, I think, of like how diverse this ecosystem is, but also how complicated it can get. So you have Kubernetes, you have Cloud Foundry, you have Open Service Broker API, now you have Bosch, you have a whole new microservices frameworks developing out there like Istio, which is another Google collaboration with Lyft and IBM, right? Yeah, so first of all, maybe break it down a little bit. So we've talked about the kind of integration of, how Open Service Broker API works across,
Sure.
these different communities. We talked about Bosch. What about the Open Service Broker API and Kubo?
Well, I'm going to just echo what Sarah started with when we were on the panel. It's all about the composability of these attributes. It's all about the abstraction layers. You're just going to see more of those because at the end of the day, what we have in the power of open source is the ability to collaborate together to solve these connection points and these abstractions together, really make them as amazing as possible, and then build different technologies around each of them. And I think we're just going to see more of that with the the CSI work, the container storage, and the Istio with the service mesh, and a whole host of other ones that I believe are coming beyond that too. And I think there's just an amazing opportunity for us to continue to build on those abstraction layers, because the technology, both in our industry but also from a user standpoint, is evolving and evolving rapidly. And I think we're just going to see more layers of that.
But I was going to say to your question directly, if you used Bosch and Kubo to deploy Kubernetes, which had the Open Service Broker API implemented through the service catalog subproject of Kubernetes, it could talk to the services and service catalogs that exist with the Open Service Broker API inside your Cloud Foundry installation as well. So you could have shared services across this.
Okay, and what if you were using, so you could do that with Google Cloud, right?
Sure.
But what about a cloud service that doesn't have load balancers on it? So what about other?
But I'm not talking about cloud services. I'm talking about service abstractions
Okay.
that are running inside Cloud Foundry, or service abstractions running inside Kubernetes through the service catalog.
Okay.
So not directly out to a cloud. You could also talk to cloud services. That's fine.
I guess one of the questions, my final question for you, Abby, is does this help make Cloud Foundry both opinionated and unopinionated?
I think Cloud Foundry will always retain its opinions.
Yes.
Because that's the value of Cloud Foundry is that the strong degree of opinions and the strong degree of automation are what gives it that velocity, and what really comes back to giving the developers that freedom. But I think really respecting the innovations that are going on in surrounding technologies is also something that we take equally seriously, because that's really what's going to be important as we continue to evolve, and giving those abstractions and adding that capability for developers.
Yui, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I think like these are all different abstractions for different people, different groups of people, right? If you're a service provider, the Open Service Broker API, the container storage interface, those are nice things to implement so that you have this nice abstraction and you can offer your service to multiple ecosystems, and that just works. But if you're an app developer, you don't really need to care about how that service came to be, right? You can just focus on the value that you're providing your company, and whether that value is through Cloud Foundry, CF pushing, or through Kubernetes, because you need different level of control on the container. I think all of those things make sense at those different layers.
Holger, any last thoughts?
Well, you raised a good question. Is there too many open source projects out there, right? And the important thing is that you always want to be on the ones which are winning and gaining market share and mind share. And in this case, it's relatively easy to figure out that I've always been talking about Kubo is the newest one. Too early to say the verdict on that, but it's connecting two things which have been doing really, really well. And that's what's the important thing for you as a developer, because you want to learn things which you can reuse in multiple projects, not next project, next open source thing. Maybe nice, but not so productive. And that's what you want to get back to the person who's paying the bucks for that project and saying, look here, we can reuse old stuff. This is why I'm very excited about the service request broker, the service broker, right? Because it's all about not having to rebuild everything new on the new platform, but being able to leverage all the older things, which nobody wants to go back and rebuild right now, and not differentiating your company, but are very important for transactional security, finishing your business process. So it's very easy right now. I mean, Kubo is a little too early. I'm not doing the verdict, but everything else we said about the open source side here, that's already winners, and that's a good thing to be with.
Great. Well, I want to thank everyone for coming out to the Pancake Breakfast. I want to particularly thank Cloud Foundry for sponsoring. Let's give it another hand for Cloud Foundry. Another great conference. So then thank you to our panelists, Yui, Holger, Abby, Sarah. Thank you for participating. Have a great conference, and we'll see you again at the next Pancake Breakfast. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Torq, and what I do for the new Stack is I prototype things, and then I write and I speak about them. Mostly what I cover is physical computing, so we have a physical computing stack. I also write the off-the-shelf hacker column every week, and that appears on Saturday morning on the new Stack, of course. So I have two passions, really, when I'm doing these kinds of things. One is the physical computing part. What's physical computing? That's when you take computer technology and you put it out into the real world, and you have some inputs and some outputs and so on and so forth. So that's that. Then steampunk, obviously. I like steampunk as well. Now, steampunk doesn't really have a real solid definition. It's kind of a Victorian spin on technology that might have been, really. And I think it's really fun and works for this kind of column and prototyping because it gives me a chance to build things and use computer technology and so on. And I'm a mechanical guy, hot rodder from way back. So in my contraptions, I use two types of microcontrollers. One is the Arduino. Some of you have probably seen that. Here's one. This is an original, I think, NG. This is one of the originals. Who's heard of the Arduino? Okay. This is another one, Pro Mini. And then the other type of microcontroller I use is called a chip, or a Raspberry Pi. Now the difference between these two, really in a nutshell, it's just one simple thing. The Arduino is firmware based. You upload the program into Flash, and when you power it up, it starts running. Reads inputs, does some calculations, and pushes out outputs. With the chip is different, or the Raspberry Pi. It has an operating system. Typically, it is Linux. So, that's a completely different beast. The Arduinos are made for speed, and the chip, or Raspberry Pi, you can do many things at one time, including reading inputs, doing calculations, and setting outputs. So how does this relate to cloud computing in general? These things can generate a lot of data, and they also can be connected to the web or the internet. You can use cell radios, you can use Wi-Fi, there's a whole different bunch of connectivity you can use. So you have a lot of data, and you can shove that data up to the cloud. Okay, that's how I kind of relate it all together. So it generates lots of data. I'm going to move off of the Arduino Raspberry Pi for just a minute and show you real quick one of my contraptions. This is my steampunk eyeball, and it's kind of finicky a little bit. Can everybody see it? I know it's a little hard to see, but when you walk around with a red thing in front of it, it follows. Well, aren't we going over in that direction, maybe? Over the big pond? Maybe I'll get to do that. So this is a steampunk eyeball. It uses a little Pixie image processor. And all the processing is done on the chip. It's not an Arduino, and it's not a Raspberry Pi, but it's a Pixie. And it has a little set of servo controllers on it, so it'll move the servo back and forth. I don't know if everybody can see it. And it'll follow me around. So that's that. I also have done a few things with steampunk conference personality identification apparatus. That's what these are. Most people think of it as a conference badge. Well, here's the first model. This is Rev 1. Not much left of it. This LCD screen went on here, and it had an Arduino. And I got away from this design a little bit because when I went to Maker a couple times, I had it here, and it had a battery on it. And I'd walk around, and people would give me kind of a funny look. And after a while, I figured, well, maybe the TSA wouldn't like that either. Kind of looked like a cartoon bomb. So I got away from that kind of thing. The next generation that really worked out was this one. This is revision 4. I have a Raspberry Pi down here on my hip. I have the battery in the pocket. And this display is up here. And I'm also running a mysterious ozone tube. Has anybody ever heard of one of those? Ozone tube? Well, what it is a hood lamp from my stove, and I took the insides out and I put a 3-color LED in there. And so I can run the LED from the Raspberry Pi, from the input pins. And I just changed the intensity up and down. And a little bit of a funny thing was when I went to my robotics club meeting, a friend of mine looked at it afterwards and he was real scared about touching it. He was an engineer, and he said, ozone tube, I thought it was going to shock me. Well, it doesn't shock you. So the latest one I have is this one. And I have some things that need to be revised on this one, but this is a Raspberry Pi Model 2, and it has a 3.5-inch LCD with a touch screen. And it's also Wi-Fi enabled, and I have a keyboard. You can use the keyboard with it if you like. And I've actually, last week I was sitting in Target listening to iTunes, or TuneIn radio. And right here on this thing. People don't really look at it that much anymore. But anyway, so it's fun. And I'm going to put a Raspberry Pi 3 in that one so the video will be smoother. I'm going to walk around with that today, or people can come up afterwards and take a look if you like. The other thing is you can hook it up to HDMI and with the keyboard. So when I was at OSCON a few years ago, I had a Raspberry Pi, and I actually did my presentation, my slides, from the Raspberry Pi. So my dream is to wear this around the conference, and then when it's my turn to speak, I'll walk up to the front, plug in the projector, grab my keyboard, and start doing my slides. How fun would that be? So also, if anybody's interested, contact me. Maybe we can work out some kind of a deal for a few units, if you know what I mean. All right, last thing I want to talk about today is Stackie. Stackie's been pretty finicky lately, and what it is a printer, like a 3D printer, but it uses batter instead of filament, and it prints in an X and Y direction. And what you do is it has stepper motors in it. It has a controller in it, much like an Arduino. You upload the firmware, and then you can put prints in to have different kinds of prints. You program the prints with a thing called the Pancake Painter, and it's an application that runs on Windows or Linux. Of course, I don't use Windows, so everything's Linux to me. And what it does is it outputs G-codes. Anybody heard of G-codes? Nobody's heard of G-codes. G-codes are CNC instructions. The manufacturing people use G-codes all the time with their heavy machines, and they, route out things, and they do cutting and all that kind of thing. Well, this uses the standard G-code model, and it's a text file. You can read it, you can tweak it. It really works pretty well. One last thing, too, is I also played around with a thermocouple. Here's a thermocouple and an amplifier, and what my idea is to measure the temperature of the hot plate, maybe grab some pressure readings and so on, and try to draw some kind of correlation between what the robot's doing and some data. Here we are back to the cloud, right? And see if I can do anything with that. So I'm working on that. So those are some of my gadgets, and I had planned a lot more in-depth, but things happen sometimes and you just have to go with it. So I wanted to do one other thing, and that was bring up Abby Kearns, if she's still here. There she is.
I was going to, it was really close.
Okay. Abby, I just wanted to thank you. Abby, turn around. Yeah. Abby's our sponsor for the pancake breakfast today. Give her a round of applause. And I wanted to give her the first pancake off the pancake printer today. The story behind the beer thing is that back in '87, I came to Silicon Valley and I went to the Tide House. Anybody heard of the Tide House over in Mountain View? It was it was one of the first craft beer breweries on the West Coast. And so I'm kind of inspired by that. I'd like to get over there and see it. If anybody's interested, maybe before, the conference is over. And so I took some inspiration from that, and so here it is.
Very cool.
So, all right.
Everybody should get one, right?
Well, we're going to try. Yep. Stackie's pretty temperamental.
Yes.
Sometimes. So, okay. Well, thanks.
Thank
Abby?
you.
We'd like to thank Cloud Foundry for sponsoring our Pancake breakfast at the Cloud Foundry Summit in Santa Clara, California. You can learn more about Cloud Foundry at cloudfoundry.org. Listen to more episodes of the New Stack Analysts at thenewstack.io/podcasts. Please rate and review us on iTunes, like us on YouTube, and follow us on SoundCloud. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.